at Penn State.
Sorry, Al.
Sorry about that. Okay. Again, I'm Al Vazirian, teaching professor of business administration for the Smeal College of Business at Penn State. And I've been on the faculty at Smeal for some 4 decades. And over that time, I've had an opportunity to be Associate Dean for Executive Education, Director of the Institute for the Study of Organizational Effectiveness, Faculty Director of our EMBA program, and of our Master's program in Strategic Management and Executive Leadership. And I'm also president of this area.
The way I see it is, okay.
Look, could you all mute, please? There we go.
Are we okay? Okay. And I'm also president of the Viseri Associates Incorporated, which is a consultancy that has worked with major organizations in over 40 countries to help them deal with issues in strategy implementation and leadership development. And I share that with you because throughout my years as a professor and a consultant, I've noticed a huge gap in the field of strategic leadership. And that gap is really around the idea of we do a great job helping people to develop strategies. And we do a great job of helping people to understand the human issues of strategy implementation, issues like leadership and organizational change. But what we don't do a good job of is helping people to combine those skill sets with the process of how to make strategy real.
So welcome everyone.
How
It's a pretty
to bring
loaded
a strategy
slide,
to life.
but we wanted to talk about, pretty much in details and covering our latest and greatest.
Could you all please mute?
We came up across, the different success digital supply chain.
Wendy, are you able to mute everybody?
So let's start.
I can do them individually at least. Yep. Okay.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, again, sorry about that, but again, how do we bring strategy to life? That's the missing link in I think the field of strategy and leadership development, certainly. And that's where our authors come to the forefront. I first met Brian just after he received his MBA just a couple of years ago, right, Brian?
Oh yeah, yes.
His MBA.
It's been about
and,
35 plus years at this point.
And I hired him to be the manager of IT, a brand new function for executive education at Smeal when I was associate dean. And he did a stellar job for us and then went on to the corporate world. And during that time, he and I stayed in touch while he honed his interest and his expertise in the field of enterprise architecture. And when Brian decided to come back into academia, we further stayed in touch, and he asked me to be part of his doctoral committee. And that's when he continued to develop his interests and his expertise and really started to focus on the field of business architecture and strategy implementation. And lo and behold, he came back to Penn State, and we have continued to work together since he came back. And it is through those interactions that I had a chance to meet Wendy. And I have to tell you, when you sit down with the two of these people and begin to talk about strategy implementation and business architecture and all of the wonderful things that we can do to improve the process, the excitement is palpable. And they've done a terrific job of putting together ideas and concepts and tools that you can use. The book is literally a roadmap for how to take strategy and make it real and how to follow it through to make sure it really happens and it ends up in results. And I think if there's anything that all of us are hoping for is a process to help us get to that point. So in order to get us involved in the discussion and so that they can share with you some of their ideas, I'd like to give them both each an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little about your interests and your approach to this work. So Brian, can we start with you and then we'll go to Wendy?
Sure. Thanks, Al. And before I tell you a little bit about myself, Al, I want to thank you for writing the foreword for the book and for moderating the session today. Your help's been invaluable in this process, and Wendy and I greatly appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Wiley, our publisher. They got the idea behind this right away, got behind it, and it provided a tremendous amount of support along the way. So I'd like to thank those folks as well as all of you that have provided endorsements, et cetera, for the book. The interest and enthusiasm behind the book has just been overwhelming for both of us. So a little bit about me. I am currently the Associate Dean for Professional Graduate Programs in Executive Education in the Smeal College of Business at Penn State. I am also the founding director of the Center for Enterprise Architecture in the College of Information Sciences and Technology at Penn State. I was in the College of Information Sciences and Technology before joining the College of Business. I've founded the Federation for Enterprise Architecture Professional Organizations. That's a loose consortium of professional organizations that work in the enterprise architecture space. And I've consulted with organizations from around the globe on areas around enterprise architecture and business architecture development, strategy execution. My research area is in value measurement for strategic business architecture. It's a huge area of importance to organizations of all types. And I've published a number of articles and through Cutter Consortium and other outlets. I'm a pretty active contributor to the Cutter Consortium for any Cutter clients that might be out there. And then lastly, I teach, and most importantly and relevant, and of most relevance to the book, I teach a strategic business architecture online graduate course that I've been doing for over 7 years now. And this is really where the rubber hits the road in strategy execution. This is where we look at how we apply different approaches that originated in business architecture to strategy execution. And I've had a number of strategy execution professionals come through this graduate course over the years and say that this is what's been missing in their strategy execution journey. That this process and roadmap, if you will, on how to link your tactical projects, your project portfolio with business strategy and changes in strategy. And we'll talk more about this in the next hour, but this course has been very well received and is now offered twice a year and has generated quite a following throughout our different online master's programs. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate
Sure.
that. And Wendy, can we hear from you?
Absolutely. So again, just echoing the thanks to you, Al, and to Wiley and Brian for going on this journey. It's so great to see many familiar faces here. And again, thank you. You know, the testimonials for the book, there were quite a few of them, people from 12 countries across 5 continents. So I think that says a lot about these ideas and support for them. So Wendy Keene, longtime strategy execution and business architecture practitioner, educator, thought leader. I've really fallen in love with this idea of how do we bridge the gap between big ideas and getting them into action at scale. And I've had the honor of working with organizations all around the world, from Fortune 500 and global organizations, some of the largest in the world, to startups and nonprofits and cross-sector initiatives. So I do live and breathe these ideas. I'm also a co-founder of the Business Architecture Guild and worked with Brian and Al on the Strategy Execution Exec Ed program for Penn State. So that's me.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. That's terrific. And so what we have are 2 incredible individuals with lots of experience and expertise and some great ideas that they put together in their book. And our format today will be that we'll engage in some dialogue up front. So I'm going to ask Wendy and Brian to share with us some ideas. I have some questions for them to get us started, but we're going to make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end for your questions. So please, you can ask them at that point if you want to post them, whatever, but we want to have some dialogue as we get into this at the end as well. But to get started, I want to share with you a quote, and that is that Michael Porter, at least, once observed that more than 80% of organizations do not successfully execute their business strategies. And then in 70% of those cases, the reason was not the strategy itself, but bad execution, which is very interesting, right? They couldn't make the strategy real. They couldn't get it to work. The 3 of us have often discussed this dilemma with great interest and enthusiasm, right? But let's start around that with the fundamental question. What inspired the 2 of you to write this book? And what are you trying to accomplish by getting these ideas kind of put together and sharing them with our audience?
Okay, Wendy, if it's okay with you, I'll start on this one.
Yeah.
So a number of things came together, I think, to inspire us to write this book. So I mentioned the grad class that I've been teaching for almost 8 years now, and the feedback that I've received from strategic planning people, strategy execution related professionals from around the globe. That spurred, and around this time, Wendy and I came together through the Business Architecture Guild. I'm an academic advisor to the Business Architecture Guild. And it's not often that you meet somebody where you kind of view the world the same way. Yeah. And we've had a lot of great discussions, and we really saw some of the same problems with the companies we've been working with. And we saw, a real gap in the marketplace. So, and part of my premise behind this was that the academia is I think somewhat responsible for this gap in the way that we approach strategy execution, as Al mentioned. So I wanted to test this premise, and about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, we did a research study sponsored by the Business Architecture Guild in partnership with the Graduate Business Curriculum Roundtable. That's a group for people like me within academia, associate deans, to come together and talk about issues, et cetera. And it's a global organization with a broad and diverse membership. So we partnered on a study to look at how strategy execution is taught in graduate business programs. And we got great responses. We looked at syllabi, et cetera. And what we found is what I was, what I suspected is that, as Al mentioned, we do a good job hitting the organizational issues, the change management issues, the people issues, dealing with change and resistance, et cetera. We hit those topics pretty well, but we don't really do much with the how of strategy execution. The how is hard. The how is messy. And we don't really get to some of the issues that we get to in the book, where how do you actually link strategy with your project level execution, with your project portfolios, and keep it linked as strategy changes. And that's kind of the heart of what we're getting into. And and we look at how what we're calling strategic business architecture that facilitates strategy execution, is really the facilitator of these linkages and enables you to maintain this alignment and linkage between tactical level execution and changes in strategy. So it's been a long journey. It's been very well received. And like I said, I'm just thrilled to work with Wendy on this project, because we really see the world in a very similar fashion, and we've come together and brought our expertise together to create what we feel is a very unique product. So Wendy, I'll turn it over to you. What did I miss?
Yeah, well said. For me, that the roundtable study was very much a turning point to sort of be able to put our fingers on that gap there. For me too, I also came to a realization that what got us here is not going to get us there. And that's from two different perspectives. One is from a strategy execution perspective, which is arguably one of the most important things organizations have to do in our connected world of constant change. And we know there's a lot of room for improvement there, but we needed to do something different. And as you said, Brian, right, we really are finding resonance with the ideas and the holistic approach. And the second thing was around business architecture as a discipline itself. And, I've witnessed incredible growth and momentum around the world, but again, we still haven't crossed the chasm. We, still have not reached the tipping point, and we need to do something different, I think, to get us there. So what really inspired me about writing this book is to team up with Brian and be able to craft the story, craft the vision, craft the message in a different way, through a different lens, to really be able to reach business leaders, particularly from a strategic planning, strategy, transformation perspective, to reach higher education, and just help people think differently and bigger picture about strategy execution.
Yeah, that's terrific. And it's a great context that you've laid out for what the book is all about. And it connects with my own research over the years, which is kind of what the thing that gets organizations in trouble is they say who they are and what they're doing, but the reality is that's not what's happening when you get down into the operations, right? And so, what you guys are exploring is how to make that connection. And so, when you think about that, then what makes this book different? How is it not like the typical strategy books that we've seen, or the books around organizational change and implementation? What makes this book different?
You want me to go first on that one?
Yeah, why don't you do this? Go first this time. We'll trade off.
You bet. You bet.
Okay.
Well, first of all, this book actually bridges the gap between strategy and execution that create those downstream execution challenges. This book actually talks about the how of strategy execution, and we unpack the steps to do so. The second is, I think it takes a different holistic approach to the topic. because it's underpinned by strategic business architecture for decision making to, help us design our organizations and do that translation. But also because we think about strategy execution, it takes a team of teams to do that, and we also talk about how all of those teams work together. So I appreciate the question, Al, because right, Brian, we asked ourselves, why write another book on strategy execution? So this was a really important question for us. So over to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was well said, Wendy. And I'll just add a few more perspectives. So go back to the study that we did with the Graduate Business Curriculum Roundtable, and you can download the study if anybody is interested. And we reference the study in the book as well. But we looked at strategy execution courses. So we looked at MBA programs that are strategic management courses that had strategy execution in their outlines. So usually that was a week or two. But then we looked at complete courses that focused on strategy execution. And what we saw there, as I mentioned before, I've got a list of topics from the study. Again, organizational topics, people management topics. I'll just hit a few here: managing people, resistance to change, building effective teams, navigating, understanding politics, types of power, change management, influence in organizations, importance of communications, organizational structures, reward systems, leading change. Okay, all of that's important, but all of that doesn't really get to the how, honestly. It's important for a lot of things we do in our careers, but none of the books that we've seen really get into the how do you actually make this work. And that's why we thought, what we had with strategic business architecture, tried and true with the organizations we work with and with the students and that I've been teaching my grad class for almost 8 years. And we didn't see anything like it in the marketplace. And again, we thought we had something unique to bring to the profession and to the strategy execution professionals.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thanks, Brian. And thanks, Wendy. But let's get into that. You both kept using the word how, right? And the words holistic, Wendy, that you mentioned. Can you walk us through the book? Tell us how you help us to understand how to make it work.
Okay, if we're tag teaming, I guess I'll start off on this one, Wendy, and then please chime in. Well, if we go through the book, so we start with taking a look at strategy development and the notion of strategic alignment and execution. And we look at, we've been teaching these topics for a very long time. And then Al, back to your quote from Michael Porter, even though we've been teaching this stuff for decades, we're still not very good at strategy execution, according to Michael Porter and others. So, we took a look at chapter 1 as why. Let's take a look at traditional approaches to these topics and where the problems are. And where the holes are. So we do that, I think, fairly comprehensively in chapter 1 and kind of set the stage for the burning platform for, what are we trying to address with this book? Then in chapter 2, we take a look at strategic business architecture. We define strategic business architecture and distinguish it from what we're calling execution level business architecture. Business architecture that's typically focused more around the development of a system or a solution. And we distinguish the two and then talk about the role of strategic business architecture in strategy development and execution. Then in chapter 3, we take a look at the wide variety of tools available to the strategic business architect, but we just don't do a tool dump. We link them together because this is really a comprehensive ecosystem that we introduce in the book, and how the tools feed data to one another and create this line of sight between your tactical level execution and changes in business strategy. Then we spend a lot of time in chapter 4 talking about a capability perspective for the organization and for strategy, translation, alignment, and execution. And really how this capability perspective is really the heart of what we're looking at with strategic business architecture. Talk a lot also in chapter 5 about portfolio management, strategic portfolio management, and the role that plays and helping to make sure that your portfolio, your project portfolio in particular, but we talk about many different types of portfolios in this chapter, and how to make sure that they're aligned with the current state of strategy and changes in strategy. We then go on to talk about many other architectural domains and business functions that need to be aligned in the strategy execution equation, and how in many organizations they're not aligned today. They may overlap and they have different silos. And we look at the problems with having these different functions that are disparate and maybe overlapping and maybe even competing with one another, and then suggest a better structure to facilitate effective strategy execution. Then we look at how you build a strategic architecture function and integrate it well with strategic planning, and how you integrate strategic business architecture with a strategy execution function that may reside within strategic planning or may be closely associated with strategic planning. And then we take a look at scaling and maturing the business architecture function, and how you would think about growing it, maturing it over time. And then we wind up with taking a look at some hot strategy execution trends, including artificial intelligence, and how the application of business architecture can really facilitate these trends or help greatly with some of the issues that people see with strategy execution. So Wendy, what did I miss? That was kind of a quick drive-by of some of the major themes.
That was actually absolutely perfect. The only thing I will add are maybe some of the other things that are inside. When I looked back on this book, I was honestly kind of amazed at how much was in there. We have over 70 diagrams, and they're not just like light diagrams. They're actually diagrams that show you real examples of things. So a lot of diagrams. We have a strategy execution organizational assessment. So we sort of unpack the different questions across the chapters. Really allows you to get a pulse on your organization and how to move forward. We have a maturity model, we have competencies, and we have a number of frameworks: strategy to execution, the ecosystem you mentioned, Brian, the various different teams you need to consider. So we really tried to make it pragmatic and more of a toolbook or a playbook that people could actually take things away and use.
That's terrific. Thanks. And, as I read it, and I think you did make it pragmatic, and I think you provide a lot of resources for people. But I'll tell you what really I had a hard time just not continuing to go back to as I read through the book. You use a phrase throughout the book: line of sight. Line of sight. And it's an incredibly powerful thing when you start to relate it to the idea of strategy implementation and the process that the two of you have created. Would you elaborate a bit on that for me, please?
You want to start there, Brian?
Okay, sure. So I think I've used that term a bit already. Essentially, when we're using line of sight and how strategic business architecture can help you create that line of sight, we look at the ecosystem that we introduce in the book, and how the different modeling approaches provide information that link to one another. So what again, I think a unique feature of the book is showing the linkages, and how data, when you're modeling different parts of strategy, how that data feeds all the way down to the project execution level to create this line of sight that you can then, that helps better assure that you're doing the right projects at the right time, and that you continue to do the right projects at the right time as business strategy changes. Another Michael Porter statistic that we put out in the book is that in any given organization, according to Porter and others, less than 5% of the people even understand what the strategy is at that point in time. Okay, that's really, when I first saw that, it was shocking, revealing. So how in the world can you hope to keep your projects aligned with something that only 5% of the people in a given organization understand at any given point in time, according to Porter? We've introduced a framework with business architecture to help you better ensure that your projects are aligned with strategy, and that you have that line of sight, that you're able to create that line of sight with the current state of strategy. So Wendy, please take it from there.
Yeah, I'll just add, this line of sight, it's sort of this golden thread, right? From strategy to the architecture to the execution. And it also enables agility, right? Not just alignment, but if something changes in the strategy, which we know our worlds are much more fluid, it allows it to ripple through much more quickly and methodically than sort of just scrambling and reacting to those things. So I also think it's very important for agility as well.
Yeah. That's great. And again, it's to me, the exciting thing, again, and I'll go back into my words, but it's really bringing the strategy to life. It's making it kind of an organism where people understand what it's all about. They can work with it, they can connect to it, and you can keep it moving, and you can actually get to the end where you can see the results of the strategy and make adjustments appropriately, which is pretty exciting when you look at that. Okay, so if you put all of that together, you've got lots of great content, and you've got a lot of great tools, you've got some great ideas. But what are the messages you hope people are going to take from this book? What do you want people to walk away with after they've read the book?
Let's start on that one if you like.
Okay, sure. But we had a lot of discussions as we developed the book, and this was one of them. And I'm hoping that people see this as something they can use to help affect change in their organizations. Okay, we've worked with a lot of organizations, and we see a lot of the same patterns from organization to organization. And we see people that kind of get what they need to do, but you're never a prophet in your own land. You know, and it's hard to make change sometimes, even though you see what needs to be done, and you have all these different areas that, you know, maybe you only have mild influence over in the strategy execution process. So we're hoping that this book can provide some external validation for things that you need to change in your organization, that can be a catalyst for change. And Wendy, I don't know if you mentioned when you were going over everything in the book, the organizational assessment piece that we have in the book as well. Mm-hmm. So this is hard. I mean, we recognize this is hard. We've worked with many organizations. So we've tried to give you a number of tools, diagrams to help with the process, and things that you can show others and work with others. And one of them is an organizational assessment to help you assess where your areas of strengths and weakness needed to really, you know, be effective or more effective at strategy execution. So Wendy, please chime in from there.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point that, you know, you're not a prophet in your own land. We are really trying to give people things to enable you, the people who live these ideas, to be able to share them with others and get that external backing. But if I think about, you know, sort of what are the key messages or takeaways I would want someone to get, maybe some top ones are, strategy execution is an enterprise-wide function with an end-to-end process and accountability. You know, right, Brian, some of the big things I think we both really see is fragmentation of teams and accountabilities is a big contributor to the strategy execution challenges that we have. We got to look at this as a very important function. The second is just to acknowledge that there is a gap between strategy and execution. It's why we run into the challenges we do today. I feel like a lot of people have sort of become used to it. It's like walking with a rock in your shoe. You forget it's there and you just keep powering through. But if you know it's there, there's also a way to head it off so those things don't happen downstream. And maybe one last takeaway would be, I know it's obvious, but strategic business architecture is a critical and often missing enabler to strategy execution. It helps us to design the future of an organization, just like a blueprint would for a house. It gives us that golden thread, right? That line of sight that we were talking about as well. And that strategic business architecture needs to be in the ownership of the business. Strategic business architecture and architectural thinking is for everyone. And the strategic business architecture is as much a part of the business as the strategies we formulate and the marketing plans we create. It's our way to understand what we do and to be able to activate change.
Yeah,
Wendy, if I could just chime in. Wendy, you brought up this, many great points, but one in particular that I wanted to add a bit more to, the strategy execution function. Yeah, and I talk about this in our executive program that we do. You know, we're all employed to execute the strategy of our organizations. And I'd like to see one person tell me that in some way they're not employed to execute the strategy of your organization. So if you agree with that premise, then that should be the paramount function of importance in your organization. How do we make sure we effectively execute strategy? And I think more and more organizations are organizing around this, where Even creating a separate strategy execution function that is closely aligned and working with strategic planning. But the skill sets are different. I mean, the people that come up with the strategy, the skill sets to execute that strategy, and especially with strategic business architecture as kind of the cornerstone of your strategy execution function, that's a different skill set. So having a separate but closely aligned function is something that we've talked about as a future trend, but we're starting to see, organizations kind of come to that realization today. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, great observations on all parts. It's kind of, as you were talking, there's a very famous quote that's been attributed to almost everybody. But it's if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. Right? And I think that's a lot of what we do see in strategy, right? Is that, we do create this direction, but it's effusive and it's big and it's not brought down to detail and it's not made clear and it's not shared in a way where everyone understands how their work connects with it. And I think a lot of what you guys are talking about in this book, when you talk about golden threads, or you talk about line of sight, and you talk about new organizational forms, what you're really talking about is, okay, if we're going to create this incredible direction and this incredible set of opportunities, how do we bring it to life? How do we connect it to people? And how does everyone see what they're doing and what they're working on as part of that process, so that we can keep that process moving? So it's really exciting as you look at that. And so that, that triggers something really interesting for me, because as you guys are creating this model, and it's moving us into a new realm of thinking around strategy implementation, but you come at it from two different perspectives in many ways. Brian, you're coming at it with a bit more of an academic perspective and connections into academia. Wendy, you're coming at it from a consulting perspective and strong connections into the operating world, right? What was it like working together? How did you combine those perspectives? And how did you guys bridge that gap of taking it from ideas and research to reality and implementation?
Love it. I'm happy to start on that one if you like.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I had just written a book 2 years ago. So I have a very fresh comparison point of writing a book versus co-authoring a book. And I love this because it was something different, and I really embraced and loved the collaboration on this, because we just landed somewhere different than we would have ever, I think, landed as two individuals. And I really appreciated that more and more as we went through the process. And the other thing is, it wasn't just Brian, Brian wrote some chapters and I wrote some chapters, and they happened to make their way between, the front and back cover. This book was co-created, right? So we would take sort of a first pass at writing the chapter, but we did a lot of adding, we did a lot of refining. And one of the things I like best, Brian, was, especially, in only writing, not speaking, we'd run into things, we'd jump on a call, we'd hash them out, figure out which direction we're going. And I think as a result of that, we put some pretty groundbreaking and some pretty significant stakes in the ground, that I'm really proud of in this book. So, and one thing I was surprised about, it was just the ease. I mean, the months passed by, and we kind of just, the book kind of, it's amazing. I'm just amazed that the book was written with so much ease, as well as just working through all this, just coming together on perspectives. It was amazingly easy. So, Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that was well said. And I'll say I'm not the typical academic, and that I've done a lot of consulting work, and I stay plugged in with industry, et cetera. And so Wendy and I saw a lot of the same problems with the companies that we've interacted with over the years. So we were coming at this from a very similar perspective. But at the same time, as she mentioned, we had a lot of very healthy debates on yeah. And again, when I go back and look at the book, I'm like, man, that, this is, now we're biased, obviously, we're the authors, but the debates produced a far superior product than either one of us could have produced on our own, without a doubt. And I think we talked through some very complex issues. And as Wendy said, this is really a blueprint for hopefully change in your organizations. I have the chat up, and we'll get to the chat questions in a second. But when you talk about how to sell this to your organizations, that was one of the drivers behind the book. the book makes a comprehensive business case for why this makes sense, why it works. This isn't academic theory. We've actually proven this out with organizations and with the students in our different classes, et cetera, that we both teach. But it makes, and I remember, Wendy, we had this one discussion. I said, this needs to be the case for change for our constituents. And that's what this book is, the case for change.
Yeah.
And a roadmap on how to make the change and get there as well.
Yeah, well, and you are, the book lays out an incredible logic, and you give great detail with it, but it is a change in process for organizations. And so, there is a selling job that needs to get to it, and we can get to that question in a moment. But I am curious if you guys, what comes next for you guys as you're working on this? Where do you see this book going, and where do you see the field going? What's coming next?
You want me to start on this one?
Go for it. Sure.
Okay. All right. So a few short-term next steps for us. We piloted a short course series. So the questions that I would get from students that took my 15-week graduate course, this is great, but not everybody in my organization can go through a 15-week graduate course. Do you have something shorter that gives us the main concept so we can all be singing from the same sheet of music and be thinking along the same lines? So now you've been part of the development of this as well. So we developed a 3-course series to do just that, to give people the highlights. It's most of the classes are 3 or 4 half days. We piloted it last year. We learned a lot from the pilot. We're going to make some tweaks going forward. But so that's one next step for people that want something more to maybe take a team through, to get everybody at least thinking along the same lines. Like I said, you can't be a prophet. It's hard to be a prophet in your own land, but if you get a group of like-minded people that are thinking in a similar manner, it makes change, much more effective and easier in your organizations. So that's one thing. We're doing a lot of speaking. I know both of us are going to be doing webinars and speaking to different groups about the book. We're getting many invitations, and now it's we're kind of dividing it up and figuring out who can do what at this point. And then we'll see what kind of feedback we get on the book. And we're already thinking about things that we might do in a second edition. Wendy, what else did I miss?
Oh, perfectly said. And I'm, like you said, I'm really excited about the exec ed program too, because it also gets peers in the same room, which I think is really powerful, and actually getting hands-on with the ideas. But I think the only add I'll say is also just working with organizations, consulting, advising to help them get through the assessment and actually put the ideas in practical action, I think is also very important. So with a lot of ideas, I think we're just getting started.
And we're already thinking about kind of different versions of the assessment as well.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
look for that in the future.
Yeah. So, you guys have, again, lots of great things coming out of this, a lot of great ideas, a lot of great tools, but some tough questions. And so what I'd like to do is let our audience kind of ask you. And Carol asks a really interesting question around, a lot of times business strategy isn't widely communicated, and it's actually considered confidential, right? We don't share it with people because it's proprietary information, right? So how do you create line of sight when the strategy is held so tightly inside an organization?
Want me to go first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I got a lot of thoughts here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure we can definitely riff on this one. I always find this really disturbing. I mean, I understand confidentiality up to a point, but I don't know how you ever rally an organization or actually ever expect a strategy to become real with people not knowing what it is. And I also think it's a challenge only to have the technology strategy manifesting that, because that's only a part of the picture. There's in part of what we talk about in the book and believe, with a lot of conviction, is change is holistic. It's not just technology. There's massive people and process and culture aspects to that. So Brian, definitely riff on this one, but you know, I think part of it is just trying to go through some of the translation process, trying to understand, all right, what are our courses of action? This is what it seems we're doing. You know, here's, you know, from the business architecture perspective, what we're changing. Like, is this right? Is this where we're going? And trying to do some of that. But to me, this is a root cause issue of not sharing. I don't know. What do you think on this one?
Yeah, no, well said. I think Al mentioned previously, you know, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there or something of that nature. Well, how in the world are you going to rally the troops and get the organization moving in the direction that you need it to go if you won't share the direction with the organization? I just don't understand how that's ever going to work. And to your point about technology strategy, there's actually a section in the book, and I have some webinars out there on YouTube around this notion of IT business alignment that we've all been ingrained to believe is really achievable. And I really ripped that apart because I think reality has shown, you know, but then we offer a more pragmatic approach in the book as well. So this notion that somehow IT strategy is going to be directly aligned with business strategy, it just doesn't work in most organizations. So we kind of rip that notion apart and then suggest a more pragmatic approach for aligning what you do in IT with changes in business strategy.
Right on.
So kind of a question that has been posed as kind of an extension of what we've just been talking about, but you know, there are people who say, oh, strategic business architecture, another set of buzzwords, right? There's always something, right? How do you sell that? And that's the question, and we surfaced this a little earlier, but how do you sell the idea? How do you get senior executives in particular to be willing to sit back and listen to this and understand the contribution it can make?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if I go first?
Please
Because
do, sure.
I love this question. Because it's a hard one. Yeah. And again, every organization is different. Every culture is different. So, but I'll tell you what I do in my grad class. So the first assignment, and this takes, you know, a large part of the class to complete. I want the students to seek out the people in strategic planning, the people that set strategy in your organization. And I want them to ask questions, and I give them a little script, suggested script around their strategy execution issues. And every organization has strategy execution issues. And most people will give you a little time to do that. You know, they'll give them 20, 30 minutes. And it's usually a very interesting discussion and revealing discussion because there's many more strategy execution issues in most organizations than the average person realizes. And then we ease into the business architecture discussion. We don't start with that because in some organizations, like you said, business architecture grew up as more of a tactical function in IT. And in some organizations, there have been successes, there have been, you know, maybe some setbacks, and you don't know how the person across the table is really going to translate that term. So we start with strategy execution. Most people have burning problems and are interested to hear what they're doing in this class. And then we talk about, then they ease into the strategic business architecture and how it can facilitate strategy execution. And I've had students come back from these initial discussions where they want a full briefing in 2 weeks. Can you help me? And I said, no, I can't. We got a 15-week course. You got a lot of material to cover. At the end of those 15 weeks, you'll have everything you need for that briefing, but you can't do it in 2 weeks. And I've actually had close to a dozen students actually receive job offers from their strategic planning people to bring this perspective into the strategic planning and strategy execution function because they understood it, they got it. And, you know, it was very, very rewarding to see how this has helped people in their careers. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Okay. You got to understand your organization. You got to understand how to make the pitch to the right people. The book can help do that. We're here, reach out to us. We'd love to help, you know, help you think about how to have those conversations. But when you get in front of those people, most people will say, listen, we've got so many problems with strategy execution. This seems to make sense. I'll give you a chance. Okay. And but then the next step is, and we cover this in the book as well. Once you get that toe in the door, you have to think about, okay, where do I start? And have kind of a strategic approach to launching and growing strategic business architecture that best ensures success. So we cover that in the book as well. because you get one chance to do this in most cases, and you want to make sure you really have it well thought out and where you're going to start, where you're going to go next, and how you're going to demonstrate the value that you're bringing back to the organization. So Wendy, please add to that.
If I could too, because
Yeah,
I think
sure.
this relates to a second question that's been posed, and it's directly related. How do you get a seat at the table? How do you sell the idea, and how do you get a seat at the table? I think you're addressing both through these answers, and it's pretty powerful to look
Yeah,
at.
over time, you're not going to get that seat right away.
Mhm.
But if you have a well thought out process for introducing and expanding strategic business architecture, and you build your successes over time, you will earn that seat at the table. And we've seen this happen in a few organizations. One I'm thinking of in particular, no investment decisions made in the organization without the buy-in of business architecture. Now those are the unicorns today. Our goal is to see that become more prevalent in organizations. So Wendy, please take it from there.
Love it. Only echoing all of that. And that the seat is earned, most definitely at the table, and it's by continual value delivery and that relationship building and really getting in there, as you're saying. So you said it was a marathon. I couldn't agree more. That is the right mindset, right? I say, if this is a mountain that we're climbing, it's one person, one step, one win at a time, because this is a human journey more than it is ever an architecture journey. It's about changing the way we think, and the way we work. There are big shifts lurking in here, right? So at the end of the day, this is really a mindset shift that we're doing. I don't think everybody realizes that. They kind of see, hey, this is cool, cool ideas. Look at these cool maps. It's about, for example, how do we get people thinking enterprise and customer first, not the silos? How do we get people thinking big picture and, looking at the things we do from end to end and understanding our impact on each other? So it's also building the appreciation for mindset. How do we build an organization that's modular so we can use the pieces and innovate in different ways and be efficient? So to me, a lot of it underpins that's a lot of the groundwork that needs to be done as well. And Brian, just to add on to one thing you were saying, or say it a different way, we always do the selling, not from the what, but from the why, right? Not like, hey, here's architecture, it's cool, but here's the challenge and here's the opportunity, and we think that strategy execution is the ideal one for that, for every reason we've shared.
Yeah, correct.
And I'll just add one other thought if I could. So I've worked with EA groups for a long time. And this is one reason I chose value measurement as an area that I was really going to drill down in and research, because I'd heard from group after group, how do we get people to understand the value we can bring to the table? How do we get the seat at the... A lot of the same questions that you're asking here have been asked for a very, very long time. And the reason that I'm teaching a strategic business architecture strategy execution course is because you got to get the people that develop your strategy aware and interested in what you can bring to the table. This has to be top down as well. We've been trying bottom up for a long time. And in some organizations, you've had more success than others. But if the folks that develop and implement your strategy don't get what this can bring to the table and the problems that it can alleviate, that in my opinion is where many people they either don't have those connections or don't know who the people are or what have you. But you got to have this coming together, and it's got to be driven, at least from an interest standpoint, more from the top, to really make the inroads that you want to make in your organization.
So in a sense, I think we have a question that's been posed that is a bit related to this in terms of making the connections and helping people understand. But this is a question from Amy. She says, in the book, strategic and execution level business architecture seems like a new delineation. Can you share your thoughts on why it is important now to elevate, position, clarify between the two? And I think you're sort of talking a bit about that in your answer, Brian.
Yeah, and do you mind if I keep going?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do. Please do.
And I think as Charlotte, so it is, it's new. We kind of debated this, but then when we did our pilot of our exec ed program, we had a student from the UK in the program. And this is exactly how she thinks about business architecture in an organization. It was so cool to have her in here at this point in time. So I'm going to answer the question first, and then Charlotte, maybe just real briefly, if you want to chime in. I saw you on the participant list, so I'm really happy you could be here today. So anyhow, when we're thinking about business architecture and this delineation, as I mentioned before, business architecture grew up more in the tactical level under enterprise architecture, which often sits under IT. So in those cases, and again, I'm generalizing here, business architecture, the scope of business architecture was concerned about the implementation of systems or, complex systems, but more at the systems level. And that's great. You need that. I mean, you need those skill sets, but that's often more of a technical perspective as well. So when we're talking about facilitation of strategy execution, some of the same tools are used and additional tools are used, but maybe in a different way when you're thinking about how to really implement strategy. And I would argue you need different skill sets as well. The people that implement strategy, that's a different thought process and skill set. So they're really, two different disciplines that have a common core, common roots, and they need to work well together. They need, so they're all important in the strategy execution equation, but recognizing that maybe some of the people that are really good at the execution level might not be the people that are the right people for the strategic business architecture integration with strategic planning. So, and Wendy, do you want to add anything to that before I let Charlotte chime in?
I think we'll let Charlotte chime in. The only thing I'll add is I think this delineation too can help some teams as well to have both pieces, but also to be able to let the execution level piece stay intact while you establish the strategic one as well. So I think it's an opportunity for that perspective. But Charlotte, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Manberg. I'm a principal business architect over at Tokio Marine HCC International. So the way that I see it is that you quite often get sort of invited to do business architecture on a project or a program if you're lucky. And you have to sort of prove yourself on that ground and then move to what you guys called strategic and I called enterprise business architect, because you have to cover the whole enterprise, which is different from enterprise architecture, by the way. And so the way that I saw it is that there is sort of a career journey for people, but not for everybody, because I do think it's a different skill set. Some people can think strategically and some people can't. And only the people who can think strategically can actually do the strategic business architecture, because you have to understand strategy, you have to understand the business and where it wants to come. I also think that it's potentially a different career path into those two different roles, that traditionally lots of people see a business analyst moving into a business architecture role. And I think they can be really good at project and program business architecture. If they have the right mindset, they can really do that shift. But there is an additional shift to strategic. And I see people with business backgrounds coming into those roles. So for example, the guy that I do more strategic business architecture with is an ex-operations director. He has a totally different background from everybody else. And our business architecture team sits and reports to the group COO and does not sit in IT at all, which is really, really helpful. So I think we will see more of people realizing as business architecture matures that actually where we need to go is that strategic place, because if we don't, we're not going to have the impact that we want to have. That's just my bottom line.
Yep.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you. Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. And thanks
And
to
Charlotte was not a plant and we did not pay her.
But
Thank you.
But when the time's right for I think an evolution of a profession, you start seeing, pockets of like-minded people, and that's what we're seeing now.
Absolutely. That's terrific. Well, we're getting very close to the end of our appointed hour. So a couple of things that I think we've got a couple questions left. Wendy and Brian, I think you both would be willing to answer any questions. If anyone wants to shoot to you, you respond. I know that you would both do that. So I will offer that. We got to most, but not quite all. But what I wanted to do is just to kind of pull some things together to conclude by sharing with the participants the concluding paragraph from the book. I think you guys say some very powerful things in that last statement. It says, the future of strategy execution demands a holistic and adaptive approach. As we've emphasized throughout this book, strategic business architecture is central to the creation and implementation of this approach. Without the deep organizational understanding and concrete ability to translate strategy into organized effort, the strategic business architecture provides, the holistic and adaptive approach needed for successful strategy execution will remain elusive in many organizations. And I think that statement is just incredibly powerful. And what you've done in this book is provide that roadmap and is provide that methodology for people to create the line of sight, for people to take strategy and turn it into action with measurable results that can feed back into the revision of that strategy and helping an organization to stay on track. And so again, I think you guys have done a terrific job of doing that. And so I think it's important we show that this is the book, right? This is again hot off the press, and it is available. And Wendy and Brian, would you share how people can access the book if they do not have their copy yet?
So Amazon or any bookseller for that matter around the world. So it's out there now. Like I said, easy to find. The Execution Challenge. You'll find us. And the ebook is also released as of today. So it's available in hardcover, ebook, and Wiley has also said that an audio version will be coming as well. And the other thing I will say is Brian and I have just a basic website that talks about the book in case you want to refer someone. It is theexecutionchallenge.com.
And as Al
Terrific.
mentioned, if you have any other questions, we didn't get to every question in the chat, but we're happy to field them
Yeah.
offline as well.
Yeah, and we got to most, but for those who didn't, I know that you guys are always willing to answer questions, right? So again, thanks to both of you for sharing your time with this. Thanks for all the work that you did in creating the book. Thanks for everyone for being part of this book launch, which is a pretty exciting thing. And I thought to wrap things up, I'd share with you one other quote, and this is most often attributed to Peter Drucker, but I think it's a powerful quote. He said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And I think what you guys have done is you really helped to define a process that can help organizations create their future. And that's what strategy is all about. So thanks for all the work that you've done. Thanks to everybody for participating, and all the best. And make sure you get your copy of the book. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
Al. Aw.
Thanks again, Al.
You're quite welcome. Thank you guys.
Mm.